Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Commissioner Chronicles, Episode 4 on the DLF YouTube channel. And the focus of today's episode is Dynasty Startup Auctions. And for this episode, we have our very first guest on Commissioner Chronicles. We are brought on by the only man I would bring on for a Dynasty Startup Auction breakdown. It is one John Bosch. Thanks for coming on tonight, John.
I assume that's because you wouldn't be able to get Scott or Ryan.
No.
I appreciate you coming on. My availability definitely makes me the easy one to talk to about auctions, right? No, I love talking auctions, Nathan. I think everybody knows that by now. So I am happy to be here as the guest to talk through some auctions from a commissioner standpoint.
And I will say that if you can't get Ryan and Scott, I think that the next two people on the list of people to talk Dynasty Startup Auctions, it would be us two. So, like, we're third and fourth. We're bronze and whatever is below bronze.
I think we could probably bring in, like, Matt. Like, Matt's pretty fluent in his auction startups now, too. So, I'm okay in that, second, third tier. I'm okay there.
There we go.
Major tier break, let's be clear.
So we'll get started with last week we did Dynasty Startup Drafts, and one of the first decisions as a commissioner with Dynasty Startup Drafts is, are you going to do live and are you going to do slow? Now, for the most part, those two are very similar when it comes to a draft standpoint. They are completely different from an auction standpoint. They completely change everything about it. In a Dynasty Startup live auction, you only have one player on the board at a time. In a Dynasty slow auction, you have 18, 24, 48 different players up at a time. And there are so many more strategies that go into a slow auction than a live auction. So we will cover a live auction quickly. I have very limited experience in the live auction sphere. By minimal, I mean none. I think I've done one or two as a participant. I will say I do love MFL, but I think that if they have one weak spot, it would be their live auction software. It's not the best. They do what they can with it, but there could be improvements to it. So, John, do you have any advice for commissioners that are implementing a live startup auction, or would you just say it's a lot better to just go as slow variety?
So I've never done a live one on MFL. I've done live ones elsewhere. I've done in-person live one. Like, that's the 101 in how to start any type of fantasy football league is an in-person live auction, because it's amazing. Beyond that, honestly, like, I've used Yahoo's auction rooms. They're easy. They're very user-friendly. If I was going to start with a live auction for a Dynasty league, I would probably use Yahoo's site, and then I would just transfer rosters over to my fantasy league, to be honest. It's a little bit more work from the commissioner afterwards, but I mean, and I've used CBS's as well. I've used ESPN's. They're all fine. I mean, honestly, like, all the redraft driven sites have very good auction software, real easy to use. So I would recommend using one of those. Yahoo's just the one I've used the most. So it's real easy. It's real comfortable.
Yeah, and the one, as we'll go into the slow auction, we'll kind of end our live auction talk with saying that, yes, there's more strategy in slow auction, but if we're talking about fair, I actually think that live might be the more fair option, because some of the strategy things can screw over people at times, and you can't really do those things in the live auction format.
Yeah, the board playing that I love about a slow auction, the ability to control a board when you just look at the auction board and think of it as a game board, as if you're playing a board game. I love that. But yeah, that's definitely taken away when there's only one player on the board and you have about 1 minute until it's a different player on the board. So yeah, definitely takes that advantage away.
So let's dive deep into some slow auction commissionering. First decision we have is time on the clock. I talked about this with the draft clock as well, that a lot of this honestly depends on how much your league is on your phones or on your computers, as well as how different are your time zones. If you have people who are in Europe and people who are in the United States, it's probably better to have a larger clock because of differentiations in when people go to sleep. But in general, what I've seen is 16 to 24 hours is normally that sweet spot of time in an auction clock. I guess this would be another part of it, is that when when a player gets the change bid, does the clock reset? I think 99% of the time, if a player the bidding leader changes, that's when the clock would reset. If the clock doesn't reset, that actually enters even more things with when your clock should be. But in terms of your slow clock, I personally recommend an 18-hour slow clock. I think 24 hours stretches it a little bit. But if we're going back to fair once again, I do think that 24 hours is the most fair one, because if you make a bid at 4 p.m., then the next person has up until the next 4 p.m. to change that. Whereas you could end up having some middle of the night, last minute bid type things with that 18-hour clock. That can still be done in the 24-hour one, but it's certainly less likely for someone to wake up at 3 a.m. to make a bid just so that they have that last few hours of people asleep when the clock is winding down.
Yeah, for me, 24 hours is an eternity, and I will never do a 24-hour auction clock. I've done some, and oh my God, it just feels like a lot. If I'm in an auction, I want the action. So 24 hours is too much. 18 hours is too much for me, honestly, Nathan. I actually prefer 12 hours, but that's extreme. If I'm just setting it up for kind of a general introduction to an auction, I usually would suggest 14 to 16 hours. Nobody goes 14 to 16 hours without touching their phone these days. I mean, everybody's connected. And that's my argument for 12 hours even. Plus 12 hours, it's really easy to do the math in your head. You don't have to think. You don't have to think, okay, well, it's 14 hours. So it's, if I put him up at 2 o'clock now, he's going to go off at 4 a.m. If, you don't have to think like that. It's real simple. It's easy. It's clean for 12 hours. And I don't think anybody goes 12 hours without checking in. So that's what I typically do for my auctions is 12 hours. Typically the people that are in my auctions are degenerates. So like you said, that caters, having that faster clock caters to a more degenerate population. If you're looking for something that's a good start, I think 14 to 16 hours is a pretty good amount of time. Otherwise, 18 to 24, I feel like it just drags sometimes. You should never have the clock just end. It should always be reset when a new high bidder appears. If you have an auction where a clock just ends, nobody's going to bid until there's a minute left in that auction. So if that setting's even an option, don't use that one.
I would agree. I would say that always reset when the high bidder changes.
High bidder.
and then we're going to talk about proxy versus non-proxy, which would be when the high bid changes, because anytime the high bid changes, so does the high bidder. So John and I, this is one of our rare disagreements, and I guess we'll both give our takes for why this is best from a commissioner point of view. But proxy is the better of the two auction implementations, because when you are doing a proxy auction, you are the players are forced to pay the market value, or what someone else is willing to pay, not what they are willing to pay, what someone else is willing to pay. In a non-proxy auction, that is more about, and for those who don't know, proxy means eBay style bidding. Non-proxy means if you see that the leading bid's 31, if you bid 32, you then take the lead. So the difference between the two is proxy is pay what the market says, and non-proxy is pay what you say. So you could end up overpaying even if the rest of the league doesn't feel the player is worth that value.
That is the best description of non-proxy versus proxy I've ever heard, in terms of like who's determining what the cost is. And I'm non-proxy all the way, but I don't think we disagree that much. I don't mind proxy auctions. It's a different strategy. It's a different game. So I enjoy both. Yeah,
for sure. Is there any commissioner stuff, or is it that comes into proxy, non-proxy, or do you think that's more so player preference?
Make sure your owners understand what kind of an auction is. It's a preference decision for the league. Obviously, if you're the commissioner, I would say set it how you want it. Make sure everybody understands. If people don't know it's a non-proxy auction and they think it's a proxy auction, that's a big pitfall, because what's going to happen is they're going to put in a bid that they think is a proxy bid, which means they think it's going to hide, like Nathan said, what their actual max bid, and it's not going to reach that point until somebody pushes it up to it. But if it's non-proxy and they make that mistake, it's going to show that high bid. So that's the biggest thing from a commissioner standpoint, is just making sure that everybody is aware of which setting you're using. There's
And
really no difference between the two and what you have to do from a commissioner
yeah,
aspect.
I would say, though, going back to our clock point of view, when we're talking about a non-proxy auction, I would suggest a shorter clock, whereas a proxy can allow for a larger clock, because in a non-proxy auction, that clock's going to get reset a lot more than it does in the proxy auction.
That's true, and that might be why 12 hours seems to work so well in my auctions, because it's the clock is constantly. Every time I look at these auctions, there's always 8 hours left, like every single time, no matter what. Everybody's always 8 hours left.
All right, next we have startup money. I often get this question a lot with blind bid dollars, and it's the same with startup, that there is no right amount of startup dollars. There's not 300 or 400 or 1,000. There's not a right number, because basically whenever you're valuing players as the player, it's just going to be the percentage base of 300, of 400. And some might say, oh, well, the bigger the number, the more like precise the value is. My personal preference is $400, more so because that's what I was like raised on in Dynasty. And so that's what I implement in all my startups or even dispersal auctions. But there really is no reason to debate 400 versus another number as far as startup money.
Well, there totally is, but no, you're right. I mean, ultimately, it doesn't matter. The only place it does make a difference is what in the end of the auction, like $1 players. If you have $1,000 budget, a $1 player is a lot less of a risk than if you have a $100 budget. Till 1,000 is kind of my starting point. It's a nice round number. It lets people do percentages real easily. If they want to put in their head that they only want to spend 20% on a player, they only have to think to 200. I do mix it up. Like sometimes I run little random auctions that I just want people to have to think differently. So I'll put some random number in there. I did a bunch of auctions this year where I used the number 666. That was our auction amount, because we were cursed in COVID or whatever it was. So there's all kinds of different ways. But Nathan's right. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter. The bigger number that you put, the less risky the low investment players become. So I typically just go for 1,000. I think it's a nice round, easy number, and it lets people play for a little bit too. If you put it really low, like at 100, that auction's going to end pretty fast. I like a fun auction. I like an auction to take more than a week, because I want to enjoy that process. You only get to do it once. For the whole startup. I mean, there are some leagues where you get to kind of do some things that come close, but I'm not going to try and force it and rush it. So I typically go with 1,000. And
next, we're talking about how long auctions go. We'll talk about nominations per day, which is probably the number one determiner of whether you're going to have a 7-day auction, a 10-day auction, or a 34-day auction. So nominations per day, I typically start out with 1 nomination per day in my leagues. So you start out with a small board, and then you incrementally get a little bit larger. So this isn't even like this is how you have to do it as commissioner. This is how I do it as commissioner. I do 1 nomination per day for 6 days. Then I do 2 nominations per day for 7 to 10 days. And then on day 11, I have unlimited nominations. So that kind of combines 2 points of also knowing when nominations get expanded. I think that's a very important part of auctions. I don't think it should be a surprise that 2 nominations start today, or unlimited nominations start today. I think preparing for that is certainly an important element from an owner point of view. So try and be as transparent about that as possible as a commissioner, and just your nominations per day decide how long the auction goes. And so if you want it to be a quick one, if you're like, okay, I want the startup auction to be done in 4 days, then make it 4 nominations per day per team. But what are your thoughts on nominations per day and how to implement expansion?
So one thing that MFL did do to us recently is limit the auction board to 100 players on the board, unless you have some grandfathered league where you can have more than 100. So that does come into play some. It sounds like getting 100 on the board would be impossible. But if you have a 14-team league and you're letting people nominate 2, 3, 4 players a day, that board's going to get to 100 real fast. Typically, I do 1 per day per owner. And I don't require mine. Do you require yours to nominate?
I do. I'm coming very, very close to not requiring it.
And why is that, Nathan? Because what is it on the commissioner?
Because commissioners are babysitters, and that is like the number one job of a babysitter in a Dynasty startup auction or any auction from a commissioner point.
Correct. So I don't require nominations anymore. I made that my first year commissioning Dynasty leagues. I did, and every damn day I had to go and check, did everybody nominate? That was a pain. So I have found literally no difference by saying that each owner may nominate up to one per day. I do it for the first week because, again, I like it to be easy. I don't want to have to think too hard. If we started on Sunday, then it doubles the next Sunday. So days 1 to 7 are one nomination per day. Days 8 to 14, 2 nominations per day. And then depending on what the league is, if it's a 14-team league, usually I go unlimited right after that. If it's something less than a 14-team league base, I will usually say like there's a 3-day period of 3 nominations per day, and then we go unlimited. So most of my leagues these days are a 14-team base or more. So after 14 days, it's pretty easy to go unlimited. Usually at that point, most of the good players have been nominated.
And next, we'll move on to illegal bids and nominations.
Now, the bane
certainly
of your existence as a commissioner.
Yes, I will say that the less complicated your league is, the less likely that you are to get an illegal bid. Especially on MFL, if you require a full roster at the end of the startup auction, which I do personally prefer, and I think is the best format, because there's an element of being commissioner that you are protecting people from themselves. And if you don't require a full roster at the end of the auction, someone's going to walk away from the auction with 11 players. And John, apparently. And I like to protect people from themselves and allow them, and basically force them to at least roster 13 $1 players.
Don't you force me to do anything, Nathan. I don't want your stinking $1 players. No, again, that's a setting that I'm fine with it either way, because ultimately it doesn't really make a difference. Because if you just put a bunch of $1 players on your roster, it doesn't impede me from really doing anything. But I don't put it on there because I don't feel like having to control people. So I typically don't require people to end with a full roster. They can do whatever they want. It's their team.
So I'm trying to think, is there another way I guess that would be the thing. So if you're at 1 nomination per day and someone puts their 2 nominations, that's really the only illegal bid or nomination that can happen in a basic league. Is the general thing just immediately delete it, or what is your strategy when an illegal nomination is made?
Well, I have this written out, so I will just read it to you word for word what goes in all of my auction bylaws. The commissioner does not monitor for auction nomination breaches. If someone wants to point out an auction breach, they must post a public message on the MFL message board stating the owner's name, the date and time of the breach, and the player that was involved. This must be done within 60 minutes of the time of breach. If it's after an hour, I don't care. I'm not backtracking beyond an hour, so don't bother reporting it. Basically, I want an auction to be fun. And I understand the advantages to nominating extra people and getting away with it and packing the board. But I also have found this extremely successful in allowing a league to police themselves. I don't have to watch for nominations anymore. Every league that I have, there's fines then. You lose part of your auction bid money. As for whether or not the player gets deleted or not, the next whole paragraph kind of just explains that. If the person that made the illegal bid is leading on that bid still on that player, then the auction's deleted. If somebody else is leading already, I let it stand, because that's like there's too much butterfly effect to go back and deleting that kind of stuff. Because once you delete that person, maybe that person kicked somebody else off of a player, and that player then would have not bid on the person they bid on. So to me, that just gets messy. So I keep it real easy, real clean. If you made the illegal bid, you're going to get fined. You're going to lose some of your auction money, and you're not going to have that player in your possession on the auction board anymore. If somebody else has already come over and taken possession of that player, I'm not going to penalize what's happened after somebody else made a mistake.
All right. And we have our next point, which will be trading startup money. Some people, honestly, this is probably the number one complaint that I get as a commissioner. I don't allow trading of startup money. I think that there's a good bit of strategy involved with, if you want a player, you get him while he's on the board, or trade for him afterwards. I think that there's a bit of a safety blanket in thinking that, oh, if DeAndre Hopkins went off the board for 70, I can offer the owner 72 startup dollars and they'll just take it. And certainly that's another element of strategy in itself. But I don't like that. I think that if you want DeAndre Hopkins, spend the $72 on him today, not, offer it to another person tomorrow.
Total opposite here. Trade. Do what you want. Again, don't tell me I can't do something with what I have in my possessions. If somebody wants to offer $72, the difference to me is when DeAndre Hopkins was on the board, the market was different. So that market in an auction, literally the market changes with every single bid that's placed, and the bids come in by hundreds a day. So if I win a player for 70 and somebody offers me 72 and they try to sell me that, well, you got him for 70, you're making a profit. I'll say, well, I got him for 70, but the market was different at that time. So to me, I like when markets shift. I like having more variables in the auctions. Definitely does make it complicated, because once you allow trading, and then of course, if you allow trading of future picks and stuff during an auction and people buying future picks with startup auction dollars, that gets extremely complicated because there's no way to know how to value that stuff. But for me, that's kind of the fun part. So I definitely leave it open in my leagues. I don't mind it being closed. I understand the argument for it. And I think as long as everybody knows going in that you can or cannot trade, that's fine. If you're going to allow it, you probably have to let people know, because otherwise some people will be taken aback if they assume that there is no trading. The first time a trade goes through, they're going to go, whoa. We can trade auction dollars?
Yeah, I mean, so far the theme of this episode has been transparency, that
Yes.
There's so many different ways to run an auction. And as you can see, each commissioner is going to run their auction the way they want to. And so if you want to run the auction the way you want to, tell people. Don't just assume they'll know. Don't just assume they'll know, okay, he loves non-proxy, or he loves to not be able to trade. Like, make sure that every single element, like basically do this podcast or do this YouTube video to your whole league and break down each step of this Dynasty auction startup and how it impacts that specific league.
My bylaws, my written out bylaws for every league have a section dedicated to auction startup. And I spend a lot of time putting a lot of detail in there. And then as soon as the auction startup's over, I delete that section. And it's like I put all that work into describing it, and now it's poof, just gone. But you have to define it. If you have a bylaws for a league and all it says is the startup is auction and it ends there, you are failing your owners. You have to define every aspect of the auction. Do you allow table talk in the auction? I define that now. Do you define that in your bylaws at all, Nathan?
No, I'm with table talk type stuff. I am a very hands-off commissioner, and I say I don't police it. Feel free to do what you want. If you want to make somebody mad, go ahead and do it. They're feel free to do it right back to you. I think that table talk is not really policeable.
Correct.
Because I mean, then you can even get definitions of table talk. Like
exactly,
is like saying like, "Wow, there's some nice players about to go off the board." Is that table talk? Like, who knows?
Is saying, hey, Nathan's about to win this player and he really needs a quarterback. You should run him up. Is that table talk?
That would be the
that would
if
be
you look in the dictionary, table talk. That's what it is right there.
Okay. No, so I literally now in all of my leagues I put table talk is allowed, and it's solely because I have no control over it. Like, I mean, maybe I could police it even in the main chat. Not going to do that, but I can't. What the hell? I can't police with two people text back and forth to each other in a side chat or something. So It's just straight up allowed because there's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah, and personally, I've never I've had people complain. I mean, I've complained about table talk, but I've never had someone come to the commissioner and say, "You got to stop all this table talk." Like,
how can you? Like, tell me how.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go take these grown-ups' phones away from them. Like,
yeah. All right. So last week we wrapped up with rookies in the startup draft. And I think that rookies in the startup auction and how you can go about them is even more interesting. So I have three main points of how you can use rookies in the startup auction year. And so the first one is rookies in the startup auction. So you can nominate Joe Burrow this year with your first nomination on the first day, or you can nominate Jalen Hurts on the fourth day. That is the most simple way to go about things. Some would say it's the most exciting, the most fair. What are your thoughts on just throwing the rookies in the startup? And is there a difference between pre-draft and post-draft in your opinion on that?
That's the biggest difference. That's the defining factor. Before the draft, I do not want the rookies in there. I do understand the excitement in the, and by excitement, I mean like a little bit of that fear excitement that you get when you have rookies that don't have a draft home yet. To me, that's somewhat appealing because I'm a little bit of a thrill seeker. I like that kind of stuff. It's risky. But from a standpoint of the league being, I don't want somebody to spend on guys and then just totally regret it on draft night. So if it's before the draft, I do not want to include the rookies. Have a separate rookie auction. You know, if you have to do your startup before the NFL draft, which is fun. I mean, that's when everybody wants to do a startup because we're bored. So if you're doing it that way, wait and do the auction for the rookies separate. Allow it to be a different set of rookie dollars, allow people to carry rookie dollars over from the startup, whatever, you know, then you get to have a second auction too, which is also fun. So that's very exciting as well. If it's after the NFL draft, throw them all together. At this point of the year, you know who's on what team, you know all that. I don't see any reason to not include them at this point. So just put them in there. It's fun to watch how the rookies then get bid on directly against the veterans.
Yeah, whether it's pre or post draft, personally, I prefer the rookies not be in the startup because I like the more action. I like that after the startup, you can look forward to, okay, we have the rookie auction going forward.
Yeah.
And then however you are doing rookie dollars, which we'll talk about the two main ways after this. But however you're doing rookie dollars, you have, let's say you do the startup in May, and then you have the rookie auction in June. You have that whole month in between to trade rookie auction dollars for players that you want in the startup that you didn't get, or future assets. There's so many things that can happen in the time between the startup and the rookie auction that, you know, if the rookie's in the startup, there is no rookie auction. And so there's no action involved with those assets other than, you know, the simple fact of like people like, oh, I really wanted that rookie that I didn't get the startup. But
from that standpoint, I can't really argue that because, you know, I love auctions. I'll just do random auctions just for fun. So that is a great argument to have them split up, even if it is after the NFL draft.
Yeah. And then the two ways to split it up are, and I'll say them both, and then, you know, we can break down each. Rookie picks in the startup auction. So the 101 is worth 320, the 102 is worth 270, so on and so forth. And all those are basically players that you can nominate throughout the startup auction. And then another way that I've seen done is that each person is given a budget. That at the beginning, and in this format, I actually think that trading startup auction dollars is a good idea. It's that everyone is given a budget. Let's say everyone's given $200 rookie auction, and then they can do with it what they want. They can, you know, trade it immediately. They can trade for more money. It's not my preferred format because I think that people can end up undervaluing it, and people can, you know, and the more ambiguity in value, the easier it is for teams to ruin themselves really quick. And I think that just handing everyone 200 rookie auction dollars and no other way to add them other than through trades is how people can ruin their futures really quick.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely can. I do prefer it that way because one, it's just easier as a commish to say everybody has $200 for the rookie auction. You can make it tradable. You can not make it tradable if you're worried about the risk. Making it tradable, I can just basically track that then. If you're making it so that you're putting, you know, the 101 is worth 150 rookie auction dollars, the 102 is worth 140. Like, that's a lot more work for me after the auction then to go find out who won what. Then I have to add it all up. Then I have to input it. I have to change all those auction dollars to account for the rookies, stuff like that. Like, that's a lot more work on me. I don't mind it either way. Again, either way is fine. And the only thing I'd really say is if you're going to have an auction startup, have an auction rookie draft. Don't be that league that raffles off or auctions off the 101 and then reverts to a draft process. Like, if you're going to be auction because it's just way more fun. You can do it, definitely. There's plenty of leagues that do just include the rookie pick, and they go rookie draft from everything after the startup. But like, if you're going to do an auction, commit and do everything auction.
Oh yeah, I'm 100% on board there. That if you have an auction, do auction. If you have a draft, do draft. If you're gonna have a blind bid auction, which I'm sure I'll have you or Ghost on to talk about at some point.
Oh my goodness! Oh, that'll be a fun conversation.
Yes, or maybe both. But as far as the rookie picks, because you said you like the balance, basically. I like rookie picks in the startup auction because it does allow for, if you want to leave the startup auction with 24 rookie picks, you can do that. You're not forced to get a single veteran, not forced to get a single player. You can just stack your team with all rookie players, and that's less likely than the inverse of, if you want to avoid all the rookies, you don't want to mess with it, you think that rookies bust all the time, you can invest 100% of your startup budget into veterans. And so I do like the strategy element of that, of basically getting to choose, do you want to invest in rookies? Do you not? And certainly you can do that in the other sphere as well by just trading away the money. But it's more automatic when you can just choose, am I going to acquire that money or not?
Yeah, then people have to go out of their way to think about it. If they all have the same amount of 200, they have to make kind of an action to go one way or the other, or stay in the middle if they do nothing. If you include all those rookie dollars in the auction as picks and stuff, then it becomes easier to kind of pick a pathway, because you just have to bid or not. Like, I mean, that's, you know what I'm saying? It kind of makes it a little bit more in your face that you are openly not going for rookie dollars, or you're going for all the rookie dollars. It's a little, I like it. Like I said, I like it both ways, but for me, I go from the commissioner aspect of, it's just easier to give everybody 200 and let them decide what they want to do with it, then add all of it up at the end.
All right, that'll wrap up episode 4 of Commissioner Chronicles, the Dynasty Startup Auction Edition with John Bosch. Thanks so much for joining us today, John. You can follow John at John Bosch FF, myself at NPowellFF. Subscribe to the Dynasty Football YouTube channel. Make sure to leave a comment below on what you want us to cover next, and follow us on Twitter at DLF Football. Thank you so much for watching today, guys, and we'll see you guys next week for another edition of Commissioner Chronicles.